you do when you want to draw claws? When you want to draw some ears and things? You look to the furry community. Surprisingly, as much as we hate the whole idea of furries, you gotta admit they have a pretty good grasp of those non-human animal traits, right? Like the horns, the ears, the fangs, claws, the paws. If we can just separate the icky side of the furry community and just appreciate art as art, I think we can learn a lot about how they simplify some of the animal features that we see in real life into more stylistic or cartoonish like, right? So today we will be talking about how do we draw or paint wings, horns, fangs, tails, etc. So we can spice up our characters to be more than human, less than human, basically not completely human, right? And so let us start out with wings, because wings are such a pretty theme that I love to do, but definitely did take a while for me to understand like how to go about them. Okay, so let's start with angel wings. And so how do you go about painting angel wings? Well, we're going to look at bird wings, right? So the idea of bird wings comes with the idea that their bone structure looks something like this. There's going to be a little hook, their longest feather, and something like that, like the most basic form of a wing. So if we're looking at dove wings, we're gonna see that it's gonna look something like this versus the swan wing, which has more of a kind of lower flap before it breaks off into that. But both of them, regardless of what wing you do, they all have that same common where this part is going to be a little bit thicker because that's where like the muscle is going to be used to actually flap the wings. And then it's then going to transition to like the rest of the wings. Say like this, break them up just a tad bit. And they're all going to be radiating from these smaller wing feathers right here to fluff up, to add a little bit of cushion and a little bit of aerodynamicism when they're flying. And so you tend to see these smaller feathers just on top of these bigger, I think they're called flight feathers, but I didn't study animal biology in school, so you'll have to excuse me if I don't know the exact terminology for it. But the general idea is long feathers down here, short feathers up here. And then sometimes they spice it up by adding a couple more feathers here and there, or they break up this form by having like a stray feather here. Same idea here. Shorter feathers we can break up into little step sections, right? And then we have our longer feathers that are radiating from those shorter feathers. And so when you have this basic idea of how wings go, then the shading honestly isn't too hard, because as we mentioned, let me choose a base color for these baby boys. A lighter color or a darker color so you can see. Because there's a muscle right here, it's going to cast a slight shadow over that rest of that wing. And then you're going to catch some of that light peeping through right here, right? Because these feathers are relatively thinner. And so that's why this part tends to be a little more saturated, because it's sort of like covered with feathers, right? So you're not going to be able to see as much of that base color as possible. And so when you're painting angel wings, let's draw ourselves a cute real little angel. Give ourselves a little cherub. Real cute and innocent like. imagine maybe their halos are going to be like side halos instead. Obviously, you can do your angels however you wish. And this is just how maybe I'm doing it right now. And kid noses are obviously going to be a lot more buttony and really much shorter because their skull hasn't developed quite yet, right? And then their necks tend to be a little bit shorter. Bodies tend to be a little bit stubbier, kind of. Set myself up so we can see those angel wings. And so we're gonna treat this like one big old shape, like a scapula bone almost. And then after we've got this general shape and the general like perspective of it, right? We're gonna flesh it out a bit. And so typically the back of feathers are gonna not have those short feathers because we don't need it for insulation. And so you're only really going to see the long feathers. And maybe a couple of stray feathers here and there. But again, keep in mind, we have that really big one feather. Right, and then we're going to shade these babies. Give ourselves a little bit of leeway. Don't do quite white. And then we break up that shape with some shadows, some core shadows, right? Even if there's not that huge shadow, we're still going to get some of that small feathers just a tad bit, especially where the beginning part is. And then you might have some saturations just a little bit or reflected light. Clean up some of those shadow areas with distinct feathers and some more shadows just to break up that form just a tad bit more. And honestly, it already gives the impression of feathers, right? Now, there are some variations to angel wings, like say maybe there are angel wings that are going to be much larger, especially for like say more serious adult herald kind of angel wings. Like if you have a character that's sort of like a seer, and so they're gonna have 4 of the wings. Like say the traditional hark the angel, here to scare you for being blasphemous, that kind of, those kind of angels are also a valid type, right? And those would be based on like the whole idea of like mythical folklore, I guess, like demons with the 4 wings. Or you might even see angel wings that are pure light, angel wings that look more like this, like an eagle's wing, angel wings that might look more flayed out like this, or even angel wings that aren't necessarily made of feathers, because now that you got the idea of wing feathers, maybe you get some that are mechanized. So you might get one that looks something like this, right? You got your main body, and then the rest are like blades or something, and then but it still looks like wings because that's the basic ideas of it, right? Same idea goes for bat wings, except unlike for birds, bat wings are a extension of their hand, and so this is sort of that whole evolutionary track thing where originally bats shared the same kind of structure, bone structure as we did, but as due to evolution, due to selection of the survival of the fittest, and their need to be able to fly, their hand bones stretched out and then had some skin stretched over them in order for them to become like these monstrous kind of wings, right? As for devil wings, the opposite, right? They're gonna look more bony, hence why bat wings are the inspiration. You're gonna get beings where their wings might be huge. A real rough sketch of a scary demon, y'all. So don't judge me if the proportions are off. So they're gonna follow bat wings, right? The whole idea of stretching the bones, stretching skin over the bones. And that's like your super, super, super basic, like, devil wing. Maybe it might be something cuter, like a little imp. Or a little vampire. Floating around with their wings. Variations of these wings might include, like, say, whether or not they're tattered, whether or not they're more bony, whether or not they're more accordion-like, right? Like this. Some are more accordion-like, where it doesn't really make sense how you could fly with it, but we'll go with it because it's just an imagination. Sometimes you might see dragon wings turn out something like this, right? Because they're also inspired by this whole like bonier means devil kind of idea. So you typically wouldn't see a dragon with like angel wings. I'm horrible at drawing dragons, so just forgive me. I need some references if I am to draw a tight dragon, a legit dragon. There, kind of looks like a dragon, I guess. See, they got their good old dragon wings. And when it comes to shading them, they're not too bad to shade them because the whole idea is like you just can see light through them. So you're just going to make sure you have a base value. Your darks, which is going to be those bony bones that you got. And then we're gonna darken these areas up, especially where they're meeting the bony bones. Bust out our soft brush and blend just a little, but we're gonna bring back that texture in order to create that sort of gruff kind of vibe. And then we're gonna add a bit of that saturation in the center where the light's gonna be pooping through. Right, we're gonna just finish it off just a little bit more so it doesn't look so out of whack. And keep in mind, even the bony part's gonna get some treatment of light and dark. We can't just treat it as black, especially if we're trying to make it seem like it's affected by its environment. Because in just flat cartoon, that's fine to just like simplify it to like black. But if we're trying to do like more semi-realistic kinds where you're having a full-on environment and illustration, then yeah, you'll probably want to add a little bit of light to it. Doesn't even have to be too much, just a little bit, so it seems like it's part of it, right? Just like in the bat wing, like it's mostly black, but this arm right here catches just a tad bit of light. Now that we finished talking about wings, we might as well start talking about horns because this devil needs some horns. And so let me pull up some pictures of some horns. Horn? Horn! Yes, here we are, horn. And so I'm just looking at some cow and sheep horns right now. And the whole idea is that even though when you draw horns, you draw them as swirlies, they still got somewhat of 3D form. Like if you can think of a horn, think of like a trumpet horn, that kind of thing, like a little megaphone horn. We're gonna treat it like that. So we're gonna break it down into some shadows. So it'll be easier for you to do whatever shape of horn you want, right? So a horn has its base color. It's gonna reach to a tip. And oftentimes it's gonna, again, have a core shadow, right? Now, this core shadow is going to wrap around, especially if it's a horn that twists and turns like this. If it is a horn that is more round than, say, like this sheep, then you're gonna get a little bit of that bounce light, that roundness that we typically see, right? Like this. And then it's not going to really twist that much oftentimes. And then there's going to be a really sharp specular light right next to that really darks. right where it's at the peak. Now, if we were to make these horns twist even more, right, try to imagine it as 3D objects, right? So if I'm twisting my horn this way, that means we're going to get some shadows around this area. And we're going to try to round out that shape. Just like that. Again, back on this side. And we're going to make it seem like there's sort of a roundness to it by adding a slight bounce light right next to that dark shadow. Right, you can see how that affects the overall shape of the horn once you add that bounce light. And then we're gonna again add the super sharp highlight that occurs especially at the peak of the horn. Make sure that your lights are facing the same direction. Right, so it's somewhat of a general horn. This ram's horn may be something more common that you'll see, like especially with themes of demons or devils. The goat has been a symbol for satanic activity for some reason. Maybe it's because people used to sacrifice goats, or because goats have that weird sideways pupil thing. Like, have you seen goat eyes? They're literally, their pupils go like this. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you scaring the heck out of me? Like, I didn't even realize goat pupils naturally look like that. I thought they just did it for the sake of like scaring, like invoking the demon or something. But regardless, you can see right here how this is a very angular horn type. And so it's broken up into like threes. Right, that right there. Bright light here. Bright light there. When it does that, it just means you accidentally release the lasso. Remember, we broke this up into threes. So it looks sort of like this weird combination of like planes. Like the way I'm thinking about it is that you have this one plane that splits here, another plane that starts around here, connects all the way through, and it's gonna wrap around like that. And it twists like this. And then this is a little twist, this is another one, and then this final plane is gonna sit back here and then gonna finally come back out this way. That's how I'm imagining the horn, right? So if you're able to break down the horn in that way, I think it'll be very helpful for you to be able to paint any horn in any sense. All right, I totally ruined it. So forget it, whatever, right? Same ideas for more flatter or more triangular type of horns, like the ones where you have just sticking straight out of their mask. Or a goat. You're just gonna treat it like a cone. You're just gonna put a base shade or a base color. Get your core shadow in there. Maybe spice it up by varying that core shadow shape just a tad bit. And then we'll put a slight bit of specular light. Right, a cone is relatively simple shape to render. And then you might want to do some variations. So it seems like the horns are sticking straight out of the skin instead of like a separate entity, in which you would probably want to make it the same skin color, right? And maybe slightly darker. So I can show you an example of it right here. So skin horns, skin horns. And we'll just make them slightly more red, as though like they're your fingers kind of thing. And you still gotta treat it like a cone, remember? Especially if you have a really strong light source coming from above, you gotta make sure you capture that cast shadow underneath, right? And it's gonna cast a shadow on top of the forehead, so don't neglect that, obviously. And it's gonna reflect some of that color onto the skin. So if you had a red horn, it's gonna reflect a little bit of that red and mix with the color to create whatever hybrid color, right? If it's a red horn, maybe it would create like a red orange. If it's a blue horn, maybe it creates some kind of grayish, bluish kind of shadow. You get the idea. So let me put away the horns and we can talk about some fangs. And so fangs, if you've ever seen a dog's mouth, a cat's mouth, a wolf's mouth, they all have that really protruded canine teeth, right? As you can see with this tiger. And so when we like to create characters, we like to associate this animalistic quality when we add fangs to them. So if we are to draw fangs, again, we're treating them like 3D objects, right? Here are your teeth. Here are your teeth. If we add fangs, they're going to still behave in the same manner as regular teeth. So we have to treat them as such. So if we want to draw fangs from front, they're going to look something like this. If we draw them from the side, just like this, they're going to curve around the mouth. Right, if we draw them from bottom up, maybe we won't see them as much because they're really difficult to see when it's kind of chopped, when your teeth are like this, right? Maybe your mouth is like this. fangs are still going to be slightly there. You just can't see it that much. So as long as you have this basic shape, the retainers kind of open case kind of idea, no matter what angle you put your face in, put your character in, you're going to be able to draw fangs. So the only things that you have to keep in mind with are what types of fangs are you going to add it? Are you going to add like really grotesque kind of fangs where they're really protruded just like this? Like almost like mantis ray kind of fangs? Or the more typical ones where it's vampire fangs. Or maybe it's the more cutesy, like cheeky smile. Hehe, just a tiny fang, right? To add like a sort of cunning, tricksy, animalistic kind of vibe to your character. Or it could even be more saber tooth, I guess, kind of like this, but go full on, like walrus. And in which case, I bet this person is absolutely miserable that they have such huge saber tooth fangs, right? Like, how would their jaw even fit that, right? How would you go about a day without stabbing yourself in the neck? Don't know, don't care. To each their own, right? Maybe that guy can like automatically retract his fangs whenever he doesn't need it, which would be a very smart evolutionary rule. And fangs behave similarly to claws because they basically have the same shape, like this shape right here. You can find them in claws. Claws can range from either your typical in a cat paw kind of thing, and they're gonna pop out like this. Cat paws look more like this. They retract. Dog paws, I believe, don't retract, so they're gonna look more round. Same with like the cartoon style of bears, right? Roar, roar, roar. If we integrate claws into humans, we might typically see them. I have seen claws that just stick out on top. Don't worry if you can't do hands real quick like this yet. It takes a lot of practice. Like they'll do something like that. Or they'll do something that's a little bit more integrated, where their hand is actually growing those claws and it's not just stuck on like this. And the trick is to connect the finger to the claw, right? Some might even opt to like totally be like Wolverine and do claws like this coming from your knuckles. TM traded. I do not own any of these designs. That quick pause was me looking at my hand real quick, getting that thumb position correct. So you know that even as I've practiced drawing hands a lot, I still struggle with making a fist because fists are so hard to draw. Okay, so his claws stick out like this and they point in the direction of the fist. Keep in mind, direction of the fist, direction of the fingers. So you can't just willy-nilly stick them out that way or they won't look natural, right? And so that's a Wolverine claw. And for toes, it's like the same idea. It's like you can either do it more detached like this, which is very ogre-like or very demon-like. You see this toe right now and automatically you think like, oh, this is like a demon or something, versus a foot that has more gradual toe, in which case maybe you'll think it's like a cat toe, a cat girl, cat guy, cat whatever doing its thing, and it looks a little bit more human in that sense, right? The separation of the claw from the hand is what makes it look less than human. And then you shade these the same way you would shade a fang. You treat them as sort of like cones, mini cones. Give yourself the base layer. Give yourself the shadow. And a little bit of bounce light. And then you're going to add a specular highlight. Some places, some lighting sources might be more specular than others. Like say if you're in a dark environment, you're not going to see much of like this huge light versus dark shadow. You just probably see it, the claw end up like this, very dark. Right, something like that. This is real messy, so don't mind me. But maybe it'll just like end like this and there's no specular light at all if it's in like shadow or something like that. And then as some other things you might consider when you're designing a character are some tails that you might want to add to your character. So tails, if you think about it, we have our traditional kind of cat slash dog tail. We have more or less than human like devil tails. We have dragon tails, which are based off of like octopus kind of limbs. We might even have weird amalgamation tails like skeleton tails, horse tails, etc., right? So the basic concept of a tail is like you're going to draw the direction, the swoopy swoop of that tail. If you want to make it a cat tail, you're going to flush it out. Add some stripes if you wish, but you're just treating it like a 3D form, right, with bounce light and everything. If you wanted a dog tail, dog tails don't swoopy swoop as much. Dog tails might just do a woo, and it's more gonna act more like hair than it is going to act like a tail mask. So you're typically gonna shade it just like you would with hair. If you're doing a horse tail, that's all hair. There's no fur at all, right? So you're treating it entirely like hair. Like gorgeous, gorgeous hair. Just like that. If we're talking about a devil tail, it's going to be relatively thin. And it'll probably end in a non-natural shape, like an arrow, a drill, like an actual drill, like the ones that you see in the hardware store or something like that. That's an option. Or just a normal like teardrop shape, right? That's also an option. But regardless, you're also going to treat these with 3D form, although it's not as much. Zoom, zoom, zoom. But again, we know that devil tails are also 3D objects. So repeat after me. What are we going to do? Core shadow and the little light. Correct. And then we would just treat this arrowhead similar to how you see the lighting shadow of squid heads, where you get that central piece like super raised up, or like this, something like that, right? Where you have like a center piece that's raised up, whereas the other sides are flattened out. Maybe something like that. Dragon tail. Again, sort of like how we did horns. We're gonna think of it in piecewises. Right, we're gonna round out this shape by softening that edge just a tad bit, giving it a bounce light. We'll add some spikes in order for it to read as like a dragon tail or something. And as such, we're gonna be casting a shadow, good old shadow on the actual tail, if I suppose that the light source is coming this way. Then we get ourselves the super bright light. Most dragon spikes aren't light see-through enough, like not translucent, but if it so happens, make sure you do it, then you could get some of that like really beautiful kind of rim glow that you want to capture, as though like maybe it's glowing from the inside out or whatnot. Right, like just like that. Oh, a nice glow that comes there. Darken up that shadow just a tad bit so it seems like there's a lot deeper form than there is. Because this is a fat old dragon tail, right? So that means it's gonna shade a lot more of the light from being caught. Somewhat of a dragon tail, right? Add back some of that structure because it looks a little bit too soft right now for my test. Now, gross alert, I'm gonna pop up a picture of a slug in order to learn how to color such disgusting tentacle-like things. Where? Ah, slug. What a beast, right? You're gonna see right here, there's an implicit kind of glow going on inside of the snail, and that's because it's semi-translucent, and so light is gonna shine through of it. So if we're making a tentacle that's a slimy thing, right, what we're gonna want to do is establish our dark area. I already feel the grossness going on. Okay, we're using good old soft brush to establish that really nice transition first. I'm gonna do a little bit of saturation as though it's the rim light. And then we're gonna bump up that contrast just in that area. Right, saturation is over the roof at that slimy area. So imagine you have little spots. I hate drawing tentacles so much. But we're gonna smooth out this transition. and give ourselves a real good old saturation right there. Just real saturated right here, real saturated. And saturation of this color near the light is how you're gonna get this really cool amber kind of glow effect that you want to see in slimier things that are translucent. Just because with water, it creates this sort of concentration of light in the color and everything and helps like separate the light in the sunlight. I had a picture of a lizard, and so I'll just quickly go over scales of lizards versus fish, and then we will end it there. So just hold on, I am almost done talking about these gross textures, okay? Hello, Mr. Lizard, or is it an iguana? Iguana. And we zoom. The way lizards form their little scales, you can identify it by a dark section. So I'm going to lay down their base. And then what you're going to do is you're just gonna paint scales. Actually, the smarter choice would be to paint the light side first, because then you can get such a beautiful gradient that you want to see going on here. So let's try that ourselves. Lock that layer, get our soft brush for those transitions, right? Then we're gonna dip on over to the yellow-green side, get that transition. So then we have a general transition. Now we're going to come in with a sort of darker color. And we're just gonna give the illusion of scales. And what we're doing right now, I'm gonna do it on a different layer so we can erase away better. What we're doing now is just real haphazardly sort of roughly draw in some of those scale marks. Don't worry about drawing every single one of them. Obviously, we're not going to force you to do that. That would be crazy. But there's that little thing. And you would really only draw these lines, especially if you are doing a close-up of these textures. If you are doing a far away zoom of it, probably you just use one of your textured brushes, right? And just try to imitate it. A tip to achieving this is to like focus on like the darker shadowy areas, right? Those are the parts that are going to catch your eye the most, first and foremost. Right, you see I'm just scribbly, creating the illusion of scales, but not actually doing scales. It's varying. Scribbly. Just making sure we get that light and dark kind of situation going on. And then we can finally come in with some touches of that light in order to create the illusion of like scale actually responding to light, right? It's like maybe right here, there's like one scale that pops out. Right, see how time consuming this can get? especially if you're doing a close-up, because you're trying to do all the nuances, right? So let me zoom out and try to do it from farther away. Maybe that will be more successful this time. Get your base color. Basically, we're now just going to treat these scales as values rather than actual scales, which may be even easier for us in this case. Create ourselves a nice gradient. I'm gonna bust out my trusty 076 to create some of that orangey touches that you're seeing here and there. Bust out 93. Get the real darks in there. And then we can always come back later to do slight detail, right? Just the slightest, because we do not want to go crazy today. Here's where I bust out this kind of mixer brush, subtle color randomizer, to try to simulate the idea of like scales. It's not perfect, obviously. It works a little bit better for, say, fishes than for lizards, but it did help randomize a little bit of those color schemes right there. Squint your eyes, try to see value, try to avoid getting too distracted, right? What we're going to do to help us is blur these BBs so we can't see the details as much anymore. Let's do 3. And already that has been a huge help, right? In seeing values rather than seeing color. Or I think that's the closest we're gonna get to lizard texture. Honestly, I feel like if you treat them as fish scales, they'll probably look similar enough, right? Fish scales, the whole idea is do a whole this, separate out fish scales, just a couple at a time. And then you take these parts that are in between, add just a tiny bit of darkness. And it'll usually read like the way I did it here, right? I just did the base layer and then I added in the light areas in rows. I refuse to give up. I'm going to go back once more, do it like fish scales. Maybe that will work. Need my trusty dusty. Okay, it's sort of working. I'm creating the darkness that's needed for the scales. And it is giving me the A-OK right now, right? Come back in with that color mixer. We're gonna see if that helps. Yeah, the color mixer definitely helps a little bit. It's not perfect, but it will do the job. Alright, so basically you want to do lizard scales, just a lot of pain in the butt. It's totally doable. You just gotta play around with the types of textures you're using. I have found that creating the large slabs of color first and then coming back in with like maybe a more, not focusing on the individual scales and looking at like overall color. Like you see how I blurred the image so much that you can't really see the scales. So hopefully that was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!